In procurement, you're always looking for value for money, right? In whatever it is you're doing, there's always the question of what value are we getting depending on how much money you're spending on this thing. And that sort of makes price an important component in your procurement strategy, which is why by the time you're done with these, you're going to be in a position to understand pricing schedules, fixed pricing arrangements, cost plus and cost reimbursable pricing arrangements, indexation and price adjustment formula, incentivized, gain sharing pricing, and payment terms. Now, speaking of payment terms, right, I've added a PDF that, talks about the various terms that you need to understand, okay, in a contract regarding, payments. So the payment terms. Make sure you download that. It's in the description, or depending on the platform you're watching this. Now, if you're a member, okay, if you're part of our mail list, to be specific, then you probably already have these in your email, the PDF. And speaking of members, if you're part of Zerate Network members in YouTube, you can access it in your members community. Which reminds me, special thanks to Gift Mandeva for supporting the channel. Now, the thing that makes price, the thing that makes price to be one of those important component or important aspect in procurement is because price is going to be affected by a lot of factors, okay? Some of those factors will include things like target level of profit, how indirect costs are allocated to specific goods and services, how busy the supply organization is. Because look, so for example, if they're not really that busy, like they don't have a lot of activities going on, and so it means they've produced something, they've already covered their fixed cost, and they still have these extra capacity to produce, they can produce that thing at a cheaper price, so they don't have to worry about putting it, increasing, making more profit. So they can just look at their variable cost, then add some markup there, and price the thing low. But if they are, busy, then they'll be like, yeah, we want to make as much as possible. Scarcity of some of the materials used in suppliers' production, whether the market is regulated, market conditions, and supplier pricing strategy. And so with that in mind, when getting into contracts, when getting into these supply-related buying, selling contracts, then you have to be clear about which pricing model you have in mind, whether there is flexibility allowing for other models. But then again, remember, whatever pricing mechanism, whatever pricing model, whatever pricing arrangement you come up with, the primary objective for the purchaser is that the pricing is transparent. And not just transparency, that pricing strategy that you're going with, or the arrangement that you're going to use, must also allow for things like variation or changes to the contract to be adequately costed, price adjustment to be applied correctly, any recharge or distribution over different cost centers to be accurately produced. And with all that, so having said all that, let's get started on this pricing arrangement. Using pricing schedules. At its most basic, the pricing schedule gives the price for different quantities purchased so that you can see what volume discount, if any, is offered. And a pricing schedule could look something like this. So in this case, we have that bigger. So in this case, we have an example here. And so there is the material description. And in this case, we're just dealing with cold steel, sheet. But looking at it, so the thickness is the same, the size is the same, but then the price, which is the same, will change. If you look at the total cost, the price, so the schedule is that the more you buy, the more of these things you buy. So you see as quantity increases, then the price will also increase. But if you look at the discount, so you're going to be given discount depending on how much you buy. For example, if you just buy one, is a schedule. If you just buy one, that's how much you pay. But if you buy, like in this case, 50, you get a 6% discount, which means for each, that's how much you're paying, and that gives you that. So you see, that's an example of a pricing schedule. But the truth is that in simple contracts, you're not going to be dealing with pricing schedules in simple contracts, because the contract will just have one price. And you're going to have a clause that says something like, for the total sum of $10,000 payable upon completion. Yeah, so you see, that's just that. But then we're talking about simple contracts, but most contracts are not going to be that simple. I mean, depending on what you're dealing with, right? You could be dealing with a contract that has some complexity. Meaning what? So call-off contracts will not have predetermined total price. It will depend on what is being called off and how many orders are, okay? And so the price will differ depending on the levels. I mean, here's what I'm saying. Like, you have suppliers in a framework agreement or a framework arrangement. So you've sorted your list of suppliers, and then basically suppliers are bidding to be in that particular list. So that's a framework agreement, right? We have like 50 suppliers that are in a particular list. And then the agreement is at any given time during this period, okay, the framework period, we will buy the following items from you. So when you do a call off, you're just saying, look, remember those things we said you wanted to buy? Yes, send us 50 or send us 100. So you see, with that sort of arrangement, when you say send us 50, it's going to be that price. When you say give us 100, the price is going to be different. So you see, that is not a sort of contract where you just have one particular price. Another thing, you could have payment in some contract being made at different milestones, and those need to be broken down. There could be a need to break down the price for accounting reason. I mean, all those things just point to the reason why pricing schedules are important. Schedule, or whichever way you pronounce it, right? So all those just point to the reason why the schedules are important. More commonly, a pricing schedule is a list of the main cost elements of the supplier's price and is often provided at the tender stage of a bidding process. And in that case, it can be presented either in a summative manner or it can be broken down, right, when you're giving out a pricing schedule. Here's an example of that. Basically, here's what I mean by that. So in this case, we have an example of a pricing schedule with cost breakdowns, right? So first of all, the total tendered, okay, so basically total, fixed total price for all the work, blah, 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 is going to be this one. So we have that. So we have the VAT, and so that gives us the total price. So price plus VAT, we get that. But then the breakdown, the breakdown of the total cost is, so we have staff cost, and we have the category of this staff, like grade A, grade B, their names, okay, their daily rates, and how many days they're working for, how much, and then we have the total. So that is an example of, both a summative, these are summative price, okay, and these are breakdown of that. So it could be many, but in this case, you're just dealing with one thing, right? Now, the one thing that I need for you to understand is that when you're dealing with items that are not like strategic items, like when you're buying pens or just cartridges for your printer, then pricing schedule becomes an important part of that entire thing. But when you're dealing with strategic items, then this one changes, right? So for now, I just want you to understand that with simple purchases, by simple purchases, I mean you're not buying strategic items, then you'll need pricing schedules. But you still need to factor in the following. You'll have to get a good understanding of the supply market, understand whether supply and demand are in balance, and then watch for trends in the market. Now, regarding incorporating the prices into the contract terms, when you're negotiating, okay, you talk about how much all these things are going to cost. But finally, when you get to the contract, you want to add these in your contract. First, you're not going to just like write. What you'll do, you'll have a pricing schedule, and then you'll just make a reference to that schedule in your contract. So it could be something like a simple contract term which states that goods will be charged at the rate set out in the schedule. Then the schedule is then appended at the main contract. That is the thing with the pricing schedule, okay? Like, it shows the price of whatever it is, discounts if any, quantity, description, all that stuff. And if you're adding it to a contract, we just mention it saying, well, these are much, the charges are as per the schedule, which is in, maybe you can index it or whatever it is. So you just mention it in the main contract, and then somebody goes to the appendix or whichever area, and then they can see the pricing schedule. So that's that. Of course, as we continue, if you have any question, you ask. Now let's talk about using fixed pricing arrangement. Now, fixed pricing arrangement is where you enter into a contract for the supply of goods or service at a predetermined and fixed price throughout the life of the contract. The idea is that the price is not going to change. Like, you get into that contract and that becomes the price of that contract, unless otherwise stated, unless there is unless there is a good enough reason why the price need to change. So let's look at that from a practical angle. Now let's assume company X is interested in 1,000 units of some component for their manufacturing operation. And in this case, they approach, a supplier, okay? And they agree that this entire thing is going to cost $500,000 to make those particular things. And what does that mean? So supplier Y will manufacture and deliver 100 units of the agreed component at a fixed price of $500,000, payable as follows. So this is like what they can have in their contract. 20% upon contract signing, 40% upon delivery of the first 500 units, and 40% upon delivery of the final or the remaining units, in this case the 500. Now, of course, there are risks and benefits associated with that sort of pricing arrangement, where you just say, this is it, this is how much you're charging, this is what you've agreed to, and nothing is going to change. So advantages, disadvantages, right? Let's talk about the advantages of fixed pricing arrangements, and these will include: it is easy to budget since the price is fixed. The seller knows exactly how much revenue they will get. And if there are advantages, there is also a disadvantage. So the disadvantage in this case could be something like if costs change in future, the seller incurs such costs. Types of fixed price contract. And the principle is always going to be the same with these fixed price contracts, in as much as they can vary depending on their nature. So the types will include: number one, we have fixed firm price contract, that is FFP. And with a fixed firm price contract, the agreement is set and not subject to any adjustment, which means in case of price fluctuation or cost fluctuations in this case, those are going to be incurred or to be borne by the supplier. But then the reverse is also true, because if you agree that the cost is 500,000 and then it turns out that the supplier knows how to get this thing at a cheaper price, then the supplier gets to enjoy the profit associated with that. The point here is that this type of contract pricing arrangement is commonly used in projects with well-defined requirements and minimal risk of change, providing clear cost predictability for the buyer. And theory, right? So how does that work in practice? Here's an example of that. So let's look at a practical example. And in this case, ABC is in need of a new software system to help with processing orders. And so they engage a company called Tech Solutions. And so in this case, the project is clearly outlined. We know what we want. And so we get to an agreement. And a fixed firm price of $250,000, that's what you agree to. Now, under this agreement, Tech Solution will have to deliver the software system as specified by an agreed deadline with no option to increase the price. And that is even if the development costs go beyond the $250,000, they'll have to deliver. That's on them. If it goes beyond that, that's on them. So that is number one. Number two, another example here of a fixed price agreement is firm fixed price with incentive, that is FPI. And a firm fixed price with incentive contract is a pricing arrangement where a base price for the contract is set, and then an incentive structure is added to encourage the supplier to meet or exceed certain performance criteria, such as completing the work ahead of schedule or under budget. And that just means that eventually in that contract, the price that is going to be paid will depend on whether that particular supplier meets whatever criteria you did put there as incentive. So if it is a budget, if we say if you go below the budget, you get something. If you go above the budget, so that's the thing. It will just come down to how much have they spent. I mean, here's an example of that. In fact, let's look at it from a practical angle. So in this case, a construction company, is contracted to build a new office complex within 12 months with a base contract price of $5 million. The company can earn a bonus if they complete the project ahead of schedule or under budget. The incentive there is you want them to complete it faster, ahead of schedule or under the budget. So how do we structure that, like in this example? So it could be something like this. Base price, okay, 5 million for completing the construction project as specified in the contract. But then the incentive structure, so early completion bonus, if they complete it ahead of time, the construction company will earn an additional $100,000 for each month they finish ahead of schedule, up to a maximum bonus of $300,000, meaning for completing 3 months earlier. Now, cost saving incentives, because that's another one. We said if you complete it early or ahead of, under the budget. So in this case, the cost saving incentive, if the project is completed under budget, then the construction company will receive 50% of the cost saving. Now you're probably thinking, well, we are paying them, so if they receive, no, the idea here is we give them the money, yes, okay, the money they've saved, half of it is theirs. On our end, we just get to have the thing done faster, and we also save, because otherwise they could have just taken the 12 months and we spend the whole 5 million. Anyway, so that's number 2. A third example, okay, under fixed pricing arrangement could be fixed price with adjustment. Now, fixed price with adjustment contract can also be referred to as an adjustable fixed price contract. So in this sort of contract, we have a baseline, like this is how much we want to spend, right, or can be spent. But then we also have conditions that allow for adjustment to that particular price, or any its price, so adjustment to the price is a practical example of that, okay, to make it easier for you. So in this case, ABC Limited is contracted to supply 10,000 solar panels for a large housing project. Both parties agreed to a fixed price of $3 million for the panels, but because the price of silicon, which is a major component, is volatile, the contract allows for adjustment based on changes in silicon prices over the contract period. Meaning what? So material can go up. We know that, right? So you're just saying, look, this is how much you're going to, the entire contract will cost this much. But remember, these things, they can fluctuate. Then you're saying, oh yeah, well, if they fluctuate, then we can adjust the price. But then the question becomes, how exactly do we structure that? So it will be something like this. Base fixed price, that is $3 million for 10,000 solar panels delivered over a 1-year period. But then the price adjustment conditions, number 1, material cost adjustment. So the price may be adjusted if the cost of silicon rises or falls by more than 5% from the price at the time of signing of the contract. Any increase in cost will lead to a proportional increase in the contract price, capped at a maximum 10% adjustment. Now, inflation adjustment, so it's not just material, inflation can also be an issue. If the national inflation rate exceeds 6% during the contract term, then the price will be adjusted based on an agreed upon formula tied to the inflation rate to cover the increased cost reduction. Now that you've brought up the adjustment formula, the question then can become exactly what is the adjustment formula? And in this case, the adjustment formula will be calculated using the following formula. So adjusted price is equals to base price times 1 plus the change in material cost or inflation rate divided by 100, right? And then price changes will be reviewed quarterly and adjusted, if any, okay, adjustments, if any, will be applied to the next quarter delivery. But then you just can't say, yeah, we are going to do that forever. You have to put limits. So, because otherwise they can just adjust and then you incur loss, right? Limits on adjustment. The total price adjusted due to material cost and inflation will not exceed 15% of the original contract value. And then you also go ahead and say, if you want to, anytime before you adjust this one, you have to provide documentations that show that the price needs to be adjusted. So that's a thing with the fixed price. The idea is, yes, the price is fixed, but then the price can be fixed, but we put some incentives. The price can allow for, for adjustments and all those stuff. Okay. So if there is any question, as always, you ask. So let's talk about cost plus and cost reimbursable pricing arrangements. Cost plus pricing is not really that complicated. The idea is you find a cost associated with producing something. So in this case, direct cost, right? So direct cost associated with producing something, and then you add a markup. This markup is supposed to take care of your fixed costs and overheads that aren't pretty much directly attributed to whatever you are producing. So if you're producing this one, right? So the question then becomes, what are the direct costs associated with producing that thing? And then what are the other fixed costs that you incur in the factory or whatever it is? So those ones will be taken care of by your margin. So you add those two, and then you have your price. Suppose a supplier, manufactures a product that has the following costs. All right, direct material cost is 50, direct labor 20, allocated overheads 10. Then the total cost is 80. Okay. Now let's assume that this supplier has a 30% markup, so that you understand this one from a practical angle. And that 30% is probably as a result of the internal rate of return. It's a decision they made in the company. So 30%, that's their markup, right? That will mean that 80, okay, so 30% of the 80, which was their total cost, that will give you 24. So that means their price will be $24 plus $80, and that's 104. That becomes their price. So that is an example of cost plus that markup, okay? Now, in cost-reimbursable contract, the supplier is reimbursed for all of its costs plus an agreed amount of profit. And this is mostly used in contracts where, think of it this way, like if there is an emergency, there was a fire emergency, and we need some people to come and not only fix some things, but also save lives. So the government might award that contract because we don't have time to figure out how much this is going to cost. So we just say, look, okay, do that, fix that, and then you're going to reimburse you how much money you spent in doing that, plus, okay, the profit that we've agreed on. So those are scenarios where you use cost plus sort of pricing arrangements. So yeah, that's an example of how that can work. Again, look, as we are continuing, if there is any question, you ask. Let's talk about indexation and price adjustment formula. So there are moments when you have to adjust the prices in your contract. You have to adjust those prices to account for things like inflation, okay? Things like, rise in labor costs and things of that nature, okay? Most of these economic issues. And this is where indexation will come in, okay? It's just a boring part of the news that you tend to skip over when they're showing that the consumer price index and you see things going up and down and you're like, yeah, that's boring. That data, those are the sort of data that are used, especially if you're in commodity market, like you're supplying coffee. And then the index of coffee, it's like in this month it was here, now it's there, now it's there. So if you have such kind of contract, you need to adjust your price, okay, to account for those things like inflation, okay, or even sometimes even rates, okay, can just affect the contract or whatever it is that you're doing in that situation, the cost of doing that. So when dealing with contract prices and the possible need for adjustment, there are a number of possible approaches, first of all, okay? So the contract could state that the prices are fixed for the duration and there is no possible grounds for adjustment. The contract could remain silent on the matter, which also means that it doesn't rule out the matter completely. The contract could show circumstances under which price adjustment will be allowed and how the adjustment will be calculated. The contract could allow for automatic periodic adjustment of pricing by linking to a specific price index. So the question then becomes, how do you calculate this price index? And before you do that, I just want you to think of it this way. Let's assume that you've been contracted to build bridges, okay, like some government contracts, and you're going to be doing several bridges in a given country. Good idea, right? But then how do you account for things like changes in steel prices or changes in labor costs, okay? The Ministry of Labor or the Department of Labor, whatever it is you call it in your country, all right? So they just say from now minimum wage is ABCD and you're already contracted and given your price. So how do you handle that? This is where things like the index, okay, becomes important. So let's move on. Index is a collection of data that can be used for comparison. For example, consumer price index, the CPI, or even the retailer price index. And the data you can get this data from various agencies. For example, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics will give you index, okay, on labor rates. And if you are into investment, right, something like the Dow Jones Index, you can have that. I mean, whatever it is, commodity market, you can get the index for how the prices in those things, like coffee has been changing in terms of percentage, silver, okay, steel, whatever it is that you're dealing with. If it is part of the idea here is that we have these, mostly the government agencies that do that because they need to use that data to calculate things like inflation and changes in cost over time. That is why those things are important. So again, from a practical angle, how does this work? Because that is a key thing. Like, how does it work practically? To calculate an index, select a base year and make that index value to 100, then express every other year as a percentage of that base year. For example, if the base year is 2020 and the value of the commodity you're dealing with was $2.5, the value of that index will be 100, right? We are saying 2020 and you're dealing with this particular commodity X and it's $2 and say, so $2.50, right? And then next year it changes to $2.6. So then the question becomes, what is the index? If it was 100 last year, this year, what is the index? And it depends on the change. So in this case, the index will be 2.6 divided by 2.5 times 100, which is equals to 104. And in this case, what you're just saying is that the price has gone up by 4% compared to 2020, which is why if you look at those consumer, something like a consumer price index, they're up, down, up, down. So 100, right? Now it's 104. What if it's 160? Okay. What if it comes back to like 90? So, up, down, up, down. So if it is going up, it means that all contracts that are associated with that thing, the price has to go up because the price is going up. Why would a supplier want to use an indexed price? And the answer is simple. Input prices such as raw materials rise, and a supplier needs to reflect these in price as quickly as possible and before competition reacts. Number two, a supplier entered into a commitment before knowing its cost, and a sudden and unanticipated rise in cost could make the contract unprofitable. All right, look. So let's talk about how that actually works in a contract. Because you've just said an index. What is an index? So simply trying to figure out the change in price. And then we attribute that, give it a number. So that number will tell us, how much that price has changed, whether it has gone up or it has gone down. But from a contract angle, let's see how that works. And in this case, an adjusted price is equals to base price times current index divided by base index. So that's a formula, right? This formula adjusts prices based on a percentage change in an index, such as consumer price index. So if it is a contract perspective, we are going to look at the base price, that is the original contract price, the current index, that is the index value at the adjustment time, and then the base index. The base index is the index at the beginning of the contract. So if you get into a contract and the price of the contract is $100,000, which is indexed to the CPI, that is the consumer price index. Now, let's say the CPI increases from 100, that is the base index, to 120, that is the current index. What is the adjusted price? So in that case, remember the contract was originally $100. It will be $100,000, not $100,000 times 120 divided by 100. And in this case, the new price will be $120,000. That becomes your adjusted price. We got into this contract was 100 because the index, whatever it is, was 100. But now the index has changed to 120. So that could be maybe steel. Remember we gave the bridge example. Maybe steel has changed by 20% or labor has gone up by 20%. The point here is that you're in that contract. Again, I want us to understand this because with numbers, people tend to just zone out if you're not a numbers guy. But what you're saying here is you've gotten into a contract, you're supposed to build these bridges, and you've noticed that the price of steel, let's use steel, the price of steel has gone up by 20%. So you are adjusting that to reflect that 20%, which is what you're saying. What was our base? When you're starting this contract, it was 100, so that we know. Now it has gone to 120. So we need to reflect this 20% difference on the price. And that is how we end up with the new price of 120,000. Right. Again, I want you to remember that most contracts you're not just going to change the old price. With most contracts, you're going to be indexing or adjusting one item by an item. So the item that has changed, that is the one that you adjust. And so that means you have to pay attention to things like, number one, okay, when it comes to doing this, establish the base selling price. Number two, select and agree on appropriate index and source of that index. That is important because look, if you get into a contract, okay, and under the price adjustment formulas, you just say we are going to use the consumer price index. Here's what you need to understand. Consumer price index could be lower than retail price index. So the seller may want to go with the retail price index to give them a higher number if they're adjusting price, which means more profit for them. The buyer may want to go with a lower index, which will make the price lower. So these are things you need to factor in. Anyway, next. Agree whether the index will be adjusted for seasonality. Number 4, agree on the frequency of the price adjustment. Number 5, how the price adjustment will be calculated. And finally, allow for negative price adjustment. For example, if price goes down, do we also adjust that or do we just ignore that? So these are things that you need to talk about. We're talking about adjusting prices. Now, again, look, that's that. If there is a question, you ask, and don't just sit there with your question. The use of incentivized contract. Now, this approach attempts to link supplier performance to the delivery of your organization goals and reward or penalize the supplier for its success or failure in doing that. Most things in a contract can be used as incentive. In fact, almost everything that can be put as a KPI, key performance indicator, in a contract can be used as an incentive in that contract. But for the most part, we just focus on things like cost, okay, when you're trying to incentivize the supplier or when you're trying to create incentives in a contract. Our focus often tends to be on cost and timeline, like how fast can that contract be completed. So usually that's the thing. Now, when we talk about incentives in a contract, we can end up having the following. So the first one, we can have gain share pricing. Now with gain share pricing, okay, the price in this arrangement is based on the supplier achieving a level of performance above what would be expected in normal condition, and the buyer and the seller sharing these savings. Okay, here's a practical example of that, right? So in this case, let's assume that a manufacturing company called Builder Limited partners with a supplier, in this case, let's just call the supplier Metal Limited, for a critical component in their product assembly. So to encourage, efficiency, to encourage speedy delivery, we come up with the following structure, okay? The gain share pricing arrangement that looks like this. So the initial agreement is that both parties in this case set a target production cost for the component at $100 per unit. But then the gain share percentage, so they both agree that if Metal Limited reduces the production cost below this target, that is the 100,000, then both parties will share the savings 50-50. What is the likely outcome in this case, right? What is likely to happen? So let's assume again that after 6 months, Metal Limited implements the process improvement and negotiates bulk material discounts, bring the production cost down to 90%. So that means there's going to be $10 to be shared. Remember, $10 per unit, depending on the number of units. So for every unit, there's a $10, which the supplier gets to keep 50%. Now, the buyer in this case gets to save the remaining 50%. So in that case, you see, there's a win-win. The other one is incentive-based pricing. And this one, it's something that is used in conjunction with other pricing. For example, fixed pricing with incentive. So that is what we're talking about. So we have a price, and then there is an incentive for you to do something. There's a fixed price, okay? But then there's an incentive for you to do something so that you can be rewarded. For example, a construction company is hired by a real estate developer to complete a new apartment complex. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with real estate, you want the thing to be completed faster so that people can move in, so that you can start making money. So the developer is interested in speedy delivery of whatever it is without compromising the quality. That's the idea, right? So how do we incentivize, or how do they incentivize the construction company? Now, that could look something like this. So in this case, the base payment, so the construction company is to receive 10 million for the project if completed within the agreed upon timeline, which is 12 months. But as an incentive, the developer offers an additional $500,000 for every month that the construction company finishes ahead of schedule, up to a maximum of 3 months early. So that is 1.5 million maximum bonus for finishing in 9 months. So the point here is we are trying to ensure that they complete this thing faster without compromising on quality, because that's another thing. Like if you just complete it faster and the quality is compromised, then that's just a pending lawsuit. Now, the drawback of this method is that the buyer can end up paying for a level of performance that should have been required anyway. Like you're incentivizing somebody to do something, yet that is something that they could have just done. Like maybe you're still telling them, look, we need you to finish this thing early, except they would have just finished it early, okay? And you told them finish it in 12 months, and then they end up finishing it in 11 months. Maybe they would have just done that, except now you have to give them the bonus. But that's not the point here. The point is that, yeah, that is a drawback. But the point is for you to understand how that pricing arrangement works. The third one, in this case, is consumption-based pricing. And in this case, the idea is you're just paying for what you've consumed, right? So the way you structure this pricing in a contract, take something like cloud computing. So rather than just paying a flat rate, you're just saying, look, you're just going to pay for what you use. Or even a good example is like these newsletter product, okay, like Kit, or formerly ConvertKit, so Kit, or even MailChimp. So you can have a package that says this is how much you pay for the first 1,000 or 10,000 subscribers. And then instead of just jumping to the next package, you're going to say for every subscriber that for everyone that you get, you pay this extra amount. So the more you consume, the more you pay. That's the deal. So the same can be said about electricity and things of that nature. The point here was for you to understand these pricing arrangements that can be used in a contract. Remember, there's a PDF, okay, on payment terms that you need to make sure that you download. Meanwhile, if there is any question, you ask, right? So that's the whole idea as far as this is concerned. See you in the next video.